everyone. Thanks for coming to hear us talk about the DeFi, TradFi Convergence. I know it's not about DATs, but I promise it'll be fun. We'll make it fun. So I'm Vy Lee. I'm the general counsel of Veda. We are a vault provider, and that's just programmable smart contracts that deploy DeFi yield strategies. And we're increasingly seeing institutions access DeFi through things like vaults. And so this is actually an issue that I think about and write about all the time. So I'm really excited to be talking to these guys today. So I'll let you guys do some quick intros, and then we'll jump right in.
Well, I'm going first. OK, I'm Rebecca Rettig. I'm the Chief Legal Officer of Jito Labs. We build all different kinds of infrastructure for the Solana blockchain network. I've been in DeFi for a long, long time. Before we even called it DeFi, we were toying with maybe OpenFi. That didn't stick as well. But I'm happy to talk about this because we've thought about bringing how DeFi and institutions are going to come together. And I feel like everything old is new again in crypto. And I was one of the original thinkers around Aave Arc, which was a way to think about bringing institutions into DeFi. It didn't take off when it did, but I think there's a lot. I've heard a lot of resurgence of those kinds of ideas. So excited to discuss those today.
I'm Staci Warden. I'm the CEO of the Algorand Foundation. Algorand is an OG Layer 1 blockchain. And I have been in crypto since 2013. I was 20 at the time, so.
I'm Schenk.
Why are you laughing? Why are you laughing?
I'm Schenk. I'm the founder of Keeta. We're a new L1. We're the most performant in the space currently, but happy to talk about that later.
My name is Robinson Burkey. I'm one of the co-founders of the Wormhole Foundation. For those of you not familiar, Wormhole is what we call an interoperability protocol. Essentially, we just connect all the blockchains. Obviously, a lot of crypto. It could be anything from meme coins, crypto assets, and now we're dealing with a lot of RWAs. Excited to be here.
Great, awesome. OK, so I wanted to start with a quick, just lightning round, 1 or 2 sentences. We hear this term or this idea a lot, right? DeFi, TradFi convergence. TradFi is adopting crypto, DeFi. But it can mean different things, I think, to different people. What does it mean to each of you?
Am I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Staci, go ahead.
Oh, Staci.
You know, we have heard an answer to this sort of for the last couple of days, so I thought I would try maybe a different take on it. There are about $120 trillion in equity market capitalization in the United States. There's $130 trillion in debt market capitalization. And probably what you think I'm going to say is that, you know, that crypto is so small and there's so much room to grow. But what I'm actually going to say is that if you look at derivatives are like 600 trillion. And if you look at the growth, if you net out derivatives, that's like 20 trillion. And derivatives are so much bigger than spot markets in TradFi. But in crypto, spot markets are much, much bigger than derivative markets. And if you look at traditional markets are like 80% institutional and 20% retail. And if you look at crypto markets are 80% retail and 20% institutional. So I think that these, if you really want to talk about convergence, like the word convergence, I think the contours of these markets have to become much more similar. And I think it's going to be on crypto to have full markets in asset classes. And full markets means spot, options, futures. And that's going to require a lot of things out of crypto. So I think when they start looking more similar to each other, I think we can call it convergence.
Yeah, I'll use convergence in a different way, which is I think DeFi brings a lot of features that aren't in traditional markets now in terms of interoperability and much more on the back end infrastructure. Like, I'm not one of these like DeFi is going to replace banks kind of person. I wish I could be because I love DeFi so much, but I don't actually believe that is true. But I think on convergence, we are moving towards such a digital age so fast. And as someone with children, I can see how, even though my children are young, digitization and just interaction with the internet and things like that are much more important to them than I think even to us who deal with, you know, the internet and crypto and things all day, every day. But one of the hardest things we have to figure out on the convergence side of things is, you know, everyone's like, well, DeFi is going to have to figure out how to integrate into banks, and we're going to have put all these compliance tools and all these things. And I don't think that is totally true. I think in all good relationships, you know, symbiotic relationships, there is some equality. It may not be 50-50, but I don't think DeFi is going to have to come 90 and the banks come 10, and I don't think it's going to be the other way either. But on the convergence front, banks are very interested. I think we can all of us here have had experiences where institutions are very crypto curious, including in terms of dipping their toe into DeFi in various different ways. And so I think the most important thing on the DeFi TradFi convergence is figuring out a way to keep the features of DeFi that make it special and different, while also allowing institutions to come in.
Yeah, it's not a replacement of the system as much as it's an upgrade. And I maybe thinking about the crypto side of things just for a second. For those who've been in the space a while, I think a lot of people earlier on in crypto were always, or digital asset space, we're always thinking of like what are all the use cases for crypto going to be? I mean, just 5, maybe even 4 years ago, it was, every game is going to be on chain, every social application is going to be on chain. And I think what we've seen over the course of, a number of years is that we've really seen what that product market fit is for the blockchain space, and that's an upgraded financial system. And so I like to kind of strip things down to really what those core use cases are. And I think Rebecca said some of those, just 24/7 markets, instant settlement, these types of things we're finding as traditional institutions come, they're getting a lot of value over just adopting these core pieces and including them in their stack. And we're even seeing that on the technology side too with Stripe, right? Like Stripe acquiring these companies, they have all these B2B customers, and they say, hey, what sort of flavor do you want of blockchain technology? Do you want to be down at the nuts and bolts, and do you want to integrate with our new chain that's coming? Or do you want to integrate with this wallet abstraction layer with Privy that we've acquired? Or do you want to go all the way top to Bridge, like you want something super lightweight? So it's an upgrade, I think, when I think of convergence, not as much of a replacement.
Yeah, I think for us at least, it's building something at the foundational layer that is flexible for everyone. Like you said, it's not going to be a 90-10 movement on either direction, but there are going to be aspects where KYC is required. There are aspects where KYC is not necessarily required. So building something from the protocol level, at least for us, is really critical to enable all the different use cases across the world, because we can't necessarily predict where we're going to be in the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay. Robinson, so I'm going to start with you. Let's talk about markets first, right? So cross-chain access, cross-chain interoperability is really important to address fragmented liquidity pools and things like that. What are you seeing from the institutional partners that you're working with or talking to? What are they looking for?
Yeah, maybe I'll start by talking a little bit about also where we've come from. I just think it's helpful context when thinking about where we're at today. And I'll start with the idea of interoperability. So this is just this big word that we've seen in many, many industries before. And all we're doing is help all these different blockchains interoperate with one another. There was a time where a lot of the blockchain or digital asset space actually believed everything would exist on one chain. I think largely the school of thought is that that's not the case. We've seen, we have representatives from Algorand on stage with us. We have, he has his own chain, he's founder of his own chain. We have Stripe, obviously acquiring New Chain Circle. So there is going to continue to be lots of chains, purpose-built ones, that these institutions have, or, I was listening to the JP Morgan panel earlier. So there are going to be a lot of chains, and that we know. And when we think about this concept of liquidity fragmentation, and could probably talk about this for a little bit too long, just to give you a visualization of where we came from and why we're now at more of this maturing point. If you had used anything on chain, and I'm a pretty avid user of protocols on chain, maybe even just 2-3 years ago, you open a wallet, and maybe just think about your mobile banking app, and you have like 4 different versions of a single stablecoin. And so you could think about maybe opening, I don't know, Bank of America or something like that, and having 4 different versions of, a state like USD that are almost in separate accounts that are not fungible with each other. It's just not, it's not usable, it's not efficient. And of course we can say like the user experience is awful, but when we start to think about, the actual developers and then maybe the capital allocators, these institutions, if a given chain has multiple versions of a stablecoin, which one do you build deep liquidity for, right? Why is deep liquidity important? Well, you can have better trades. Why is better trades good? You can provide a better user experience, or you can build applications on top of that and swap in and out of tokens and make it cheap and seamless, et cetera. So it's this compounding like infrastructure problem that is liquidity fragmentation, and we see it everywhere, right? So we saw it a while ago with stable coins. We even see there's multiple versions of Sol out there, multiple versions of Ethereum, et cetera. But I think the industry has a lot of different standards now, or multi-chain standards. Obviously we have one, but there's a number of them to help solve this kind of fragmentation issue. And I think we're now at the point where a lot of this is maturing to a point that it is usable especially for institutions. And maybe I'll wrap by saying, the other day I went through the process of, okay, I want to actually take I want to buy a money market fund on chain, and I want to send it to another chain, use it as collateral in an application, and I walked through the whole process. It actually took me a couple days, but it's getting much better. The fact that we can even do it, in general, I think is great. And for instance, we work with folks like BlackRock, Apollo, private credit funds, money markets. It doesn't matter, but we make sure they can move between all the chains. And the example that I did specifically is I was on Solana. I took out a money market fund position, and then I wanted to actually move it to Morpho, which is this protocol that's on Polygon. I sent it there, had to take, it's great collateral, right? That's what we're really, really excited about when it comes to these RWAs. And ultimately, it all worked, and I can see where it gets faster over time, but it's important that all of this is composable, and if we can string it together to start, we can then analyze where we can cut down the time to make it more and more efficient. So I think it's exciting for me, because I'll end by saying this. I think in 2020, 2021, it was kind of, the institutions are coming. You could maybe argue that things like FTX set us back quite a bit as an industry, and we would have got there earlier. But now I look at block explorers, I look at on-chain data, and I can see these assets minted on-chain. I can see them being used more and more in DeFi, and I think we're really shifting from coming to here.
Yeah.
Can I pick up one point about the composability point and thinking about markets? And I know Staci's had a lot of market experience too, so I'm interested to hear what she has to say on this concept. But we think about efficient markets, and it's about how can they ingest information? But markets can only ingest information when you do have deep liquidity, right? When you have very thin and thinly traded assets, thin markets, I think things shift and are volatile. We see that a lot with crypto assets, especially with thinly traded digital assets. And so you need the interoperability feature in order to ensure liquidity is extremely deep. And I think that's what we have in traditional markets now, some depth of liquidity for a lot of the important assets. And so we do need operability in order to have, similar types of liquidity and depth.
Yeah. So Staci, I want to turn to you. If you're an institutional trading desk today, looking to plug into DeFi, what do you think the biggest barriers to adoption are? Do you think it's technical? Do you think it's compliance, counterparty risk, or something else?
Well, there's, the existential difference between crypto and traditional finance is that crypto is fully or over collateralized, and traditional finance works on margin, right? And so if you really want convergence means that crypto is going to start operating on margin. And if we get to that point, we think we have a lot of work to do now. We have a lot of work to do to be in a margin environment, right? So if I'm at a traditional trading desk, now I have to worry about things that are pretty actually kind of hard, but it require a lot of effort, but are pretty easy. It's got to talk to my EMS, it's got to talk to my OMS, it's got to talk to my compliance service provider, right? I can't be sending it to some bank offshore, right? I have to know do my traders have access to the private key, or who has access to the private key when the trade actually gets executed, right? And then you spoke about the kind of the 9 to 5 aspect of it. That's all there. That's takes time to figure out and do and integrate, and of course everybody has to kind of move together. There's no first mover advantage in finance because everything is so coordinated together. But if crypto really takes that next step and you start treating crypto as on margin kind of asset class, and if you build out the derivatives that I was talking about earlier, then you need a whole lot more market infrastructure. You need clearing houses, right? You need to be able to net. Derivatives take place in they're socialized, right? You can't go counterparty by counterparty and start reconciling things. They need to be socially reconciled. You can't have that counterparty risk. So you need clearing houses. So to be a traditional trading desk that thinks the way that it thinks now, we're, I would argue, pretty far away from being able to integrate fully into crypto markets.
Yeah, so I think trading is going to require a lot of barriers that we have to address. Payments, though, I think are often the first bridge between TradFi and DeFi, right? It's a little bit simpler. How do you think blockchain payment networks can integrate with existing systems like FedNow or the credit card networks without just replicating the cost structures and the inefficiencies that we see in the current system?
Yeah, so I would say two things there. One is you can't move, and they talked about this on the panel before this, but I'll just say it again briefly. You know, tokenizing something is like not that hard, right? You know, I mean, it's just like computer code. Not that I can do any computer code, but it seems easy to me from, you know, quite far away. But anyway, it's just computer code. And, but what you need is the other leg. You need the payments leg. You need atomic swaps. That smart contract has to have the payment working with the asset transfer. So on Algorand, for example, we have a payments provider called Quantos, which is regulated by the Dutch Central Bank. These are going to be very important things. And we tokenize an Aberdeen money market fund. But the interesting thing about that was not the tokenization of the Aberdeen money market fund. I really hope there's nobody from Aberdeen here in the audience, but that part was pretty straightforward. It was doing the atomic swap, you know, instantly. And because in crypto, clearing is settlement. Like, that's the coolest thing about crypto. There's no like swift messaging leg that has to take place. And you know, I'm old enough to remember when we went from T+3 to T+2 and then T+2 to T+1, it was like a really big deal. And crypto doesn't need any of that. So I think that kind of atomic settlement is going to be very important on the payment side. The other thing on payments that I think is pretty interesting is just the 24/7, you know, element of it that I think, you know, crypto can also provide.
Okay, so I wanted to dive into the technology and the protocol layer for a minute. So Ty, where do you think the next leap in throughput and resilience will come from? Do you think the innovation will come at the protocol level? Will it come through L2s or some sort of hybrid approach?
Yeah, I think a lot of the ideas have been L2 driven over the last 5-10 years. But for us, it was really critical to be L1 driven. The entire L1 needs to be able to scale to the needs of the next generation. If you look at the way that payments work today, there's trillions of dollars that move every day, tens of millions of TPS across over 1,000 networks. And so that's not going to be able to go over an L2 or a kind of a Band-Aid solution. It needs to be some sort of foundational layer that can actually connect everything together. I do think existing networks are going to continue and they'll have their use cases. You know, as we've seen, banks are launching their own chains, everyone's doing their own chain. So being able to have someone that can connect everything together is really critical. I think it's also important to leverage existing cloud scale. A lot of existing L1s don't scale at the cloud, which I think is actually a significant oversight just over development over the last 10 years of blockchain. So for us, we've scaled with GCP, have a pretty deep partnership there, and that's been able to deliver great performance.
And Rebecca, do you want to address this from like Solana's point of view? Like when you're talking to institutions, are they asking about this sort of monolithic blockchain like approach versus the L2 scaling approach? Like how familiar are they with the different models and what are they asking about?
I think that the innovation arms at a lot of these institutions are pretty familiar at this point with the differences between L1s, L2s, the differences between the different L1s. So I think they're pretty familiar. I think the bigger challenge is actually the other arms of the banks that aren't even familiar with, you know, so much about just even, you know, blockchain 101, and getting other parts of the bank to sign off on a lot of these integrations may be harder.
Yeah.
And then once they get comfortable with it, they want to bring it in-house, everything, right? I mean, we had Bonnie up here yesterday, and she was talking about like how her dream is to like do everything at Bonnie, of course, because like the two most powerful forces in the world are gravity and centralization, and it's our job to fight against that.
Stay permissionless.
Yeah, stay permissionless.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about MEV for a second because I think it's such an interesting example of something that happens in DeFi that is illegal in the TradFi context when you're talking about securities trading, right? Front running is not allowed. And there are, of course, different forms of MEV, and it can mean different things and serve different purposes in the DeFi context. But Rebecca, I'll start with you, right? So MEV could potentially undermine trust in the DeFi context, right? And I think that's something that a lot of institutions are worried about.
They are.
What do you think about that? What are some solutions, or how can we address that?
I mean, we do build transaction sequencing infrastructure for Solana, so we think about it. I think about it a lot from a regulatory perspective. And I will say, as you said, so MEV stands for maximum extractable value. It really started with the concept in Bitcoin miners, moving transactions in certain ways to be able to extract certain value and the way the transactions were sequenced. And it can happen in somewhat harmfully extractive ways in DeFi transactions. It can also just refer to the fact that like people are sequencing transactions to be able to get settled very quickly on a blockchain network. I think that institutions want privacy so that their transactions cannot be either front run, which is illegal. I would say front running is not always, like the other problem in crypto is we use terrible language for things that may not be true. So like front running is obviously an illegal thing. We just say that generally with respect to MEV, but like not all MEV is front running. And not all MEV is sandwiching, another type of where you put different transactions on the front and the back of somebody else's transaction in order to be able to extract value, get more fees, things like that. We have actually just announced a type of new transaction sequencing technology that is built through trusted execution environments. So you do have privacy around the way the transactions are sequenced in order to be able to reduce harmful MEV, and then also then they're sent to the validators and get settled on the blockchain in a traditional way. So you have transparency around them, and so you get the same benefits. But I think that a lot of the regulations around trading, and Vee and I were in a meeting earlier today where she brought up Reg NMS, which was put in place in order to stop some of the harmful activity of high-frequency traders who were basically doing things like front-running and the like to ensure that people got the best execution and best value. But I think if you actually go back and you look at Chair Atkins and you look at Commissioner Peirce's thoughts around Reg NMS, it's not just about best price. That best execution actually means, you know, how fast are you settling? Yes, of course, best price, but a lot of different features of transactions. And so blockchains can do all those things, but we have to figure out the privacy issue, which I know everybody talks about all the time, and this is not what this panel is about. But you have to figure out the privacy issue and then also the transparency issue.
Staci, maybe you can talk to that. Why is privacy important in the TradFi context, like with institutions that want to trade in certain circumstances? And why do we want to be able to offer that in the DeFi context too?
Yeah, it's both privacy and obfuscation, because if you're going to put a big order into a market, you can move that market by the nature of your size. And so this is what brokers do. You split up your order into lots of little pieces, and you use your brokers to you're constantly trying to hide who you are. And it's not just size, it's like if you are a known entity that has a vested interest in something. It's like, you know, if the house next door to me goes on sale and I put my hand up to buy it, that seller's going to be like, oh, she really wants it because she lives next door and she might want a bigger yard or whatever it is. I mean, you guys all know finance, so I'm not trying to give a lecture on this, but this idea, and so dark pools came up, right? And this enabled also after hours trading and all these kinds of things. And these things that sound, you know, better are really actually not as good for efficient markets. And things like obfuscation and dark pools and privacy are really much more, they're very important for the well-functioning of markets. And if you allow me in this political environment to make an analogy to politics, you know, I think that a lot of the bipartisanship in this country came from C-SPAN, because all of a sudden, like, they're being filmed in the House arguing. They know that their constituents might be, and so when they were a bit more behind closed doors, they talked to each other, they compromised more, they brokered deals, and so there's an analog in trading that's important. And so, you know, blockchain has to be very careful about giving you the traceability that you need, but also giving you the privacy and the obfuscation that you need to actually get a better executed trade that's fairer to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, did you ask?
It's not somewhat on the same topic, but another area of blockchain that I think is interesting, and I agree with the sentiment there, but where maybe the hot take is that I think some of the openness, it ultimately gets us to a better spot, but may not be the most efficient, is governance. And I think governance in particular in crypto is a spot we really haven't gotten to with a lot of the discussions. I know particularly here, it's focused on, I know, DATs and compliance and privacy and some of these RWAs, but I think that there's going to be a point, and that point will be soon, when we think about some of these protocols that have these open governance systems that I want to be good and I want to kind of get behind and have this open system, but it ultimately ends up being much more difficult for, I think, the protocols to move forward. And it's this funny, I don't know, I've seen many protocols, some founders that I've been friends with and known for a while, used for a while, where the governance ends up being this quagmire where actually things don't end up being getting done, excuse me. And so I think there's a balance there, and I'm drawing somewhat of an analogy with what you're talking about, but that's an area where I think there's still, like, we need to be a little bit more pointed on how we should move forward, because, you know, some of these governance systems are just way too decentralized, maybe I'll go out on a limb and say, but at the same time, we don't want them to be so centralized that 3 people or, you know, 5 people, et cetera, can make all the decisions. So open systems are great, but sometimes they have their downfalls too.
Yeah, I think between privacy and governance, those are probably 2 of the things that I think will hinder TradFi adoption the most if we don't figure it out. Yeah. So one thing I've really loved seeing more recently, and I think this is part of the TradFi DeFi convergence trend, is the 2 sides really working together to create new opportunities for consumers, right? So one example I'm thinking of is the letter that Jito just wrote to the SEC alongside some TradFi partners like Van Eck and Bitwise, I think it was, urging them to adopt liquid staking in the ETFs. So Rebecca, why do you think this kind of collaboration is important, and do you think we'll see more of it?
I think that certain forward-thinking institutions are seeing, it goes back to sort of what we were all saying very early during our lightning round, that there are benefits to DeFi that don't exist in TradFi today. It's not all of them, right? Like, and you know, governance is a great point about, I think, and you're right, I think institutions are pretty wary around decentralized governance in certain ways. But I think that collaboration is important because it does bring end users a better product in certain aspects. So LSTs are very efficient in many ways. It actually makes administration of certain types of vehicles easier. And so, you know, that's a place where institutions and builders can be really aligned. But I don't think it's true across the board. But I think just as with policy, while we still have a lot of education to do, we have a lot of education to do. And we also need to receive education on the institutional side, because we're like, oh, you guys should just dive into DeFi and it's great, it's going to change everything. And I think we need to really think about where it actually will enhance businesses and then sort of drive towards that if we do want to see this convergence.
And have you guys seen better results when you go to the regulators, like in collaboration with TradFi partners? Like, do you feel like they're more receptive because they're hearing, you know, like from both sides?
Certainly.
And it's kind of a united front, I guess?
When we were developing over the last few years, one of the things that really drove our feature set was what is needed in TradFi. I don't think that that's a question that's really addressed very much during the development process. And so when we did that, we were able to learn quite a bit about what the regulators wanted and how to make them more comfortable with the technology. And I think that that ultimately is what's going to drive the convergence overall long term.
And I think it's, I kind of call this, I think it's causing what I would deem as crypto's practical era, right? We're making certain sacrifices that if you looked at the industry 5 years ago, you would just be laughed out of a room. For instance, I think I'm not going to sit here and say this is not right. I actually think we need systems like this, but thinking about like an Ethereum, for instance, it's like nation state, proof level decentralization with all the permissionless validators they have. And we have a lot of blockchains like this, and I think we need that. We absolutely need that. But now we're starting to see more and more blockchains make sacrifices on these principles. And what I mean by that is quite literally the amount of validators that secure the network, right? Like if you think about, Hyperliquid as an example, I know that's not as like traditional finance related, but there's, I'll give maybe a better example is Circle. Circle's new chain is literally 20 validators, right? Wormhole, we had this model a while ago and we're criticized, so small plug, we're 19. But when having these conversations, these convergence conversations, I guess, the practicality comes out a lot. I think a good example is like, hey, you only have 19 validators, that's great. I can sue those validators if they do something wrong. Like that's practical approach, and that's how adoption happens. Another good example is, when it comes to governance, right? It's like, well, do we want to deal with this army of people that we actually don't know who they are. And again, I'm not saying that's necessarily right, but maybe it makes more sense to have a council of 15, right? And so I think what's interesting about like coming to the table together is that both sides are making some sacrifices, and I'm seeing decisions that, you know, I'm maybe making some hot takes up here, but decisions that 4 years ago in the crypto industry in particular would have never been made or would have never been really considered.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's kind of like crypto meeting the real world,
Yeah.
right? That's what the convergence means to me.
Yeah.
I also think that, you know, traditional finance is a Trojan stalking horse for crypto with regulators because there's so much back office improvements that traditional finance can do on crypto rails, using tokenized money instead of, you know, a liability framework for money. And so if you approach and just say, look, we're just trying to make our, you know, our back offices better, then, you know, it gets regulators used to the idea of these rails without consumer-facing concerns.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So we just have a few minutes left. I'm gonna close with this question for all of you. Going forward, could the convergence mean that we're forced to compromise on some of crypto's core values and the benefits of decentralization? And conversely, could importing DeFi into TradFi cause crypto to import some of TradFi's weaknesses? What do you guys think?
I mean, I kind of just answered yes on that in a way. Yeah, I absolutely think that it's a force that's hard to stop, where if the crypto or digital asset industry wants to have broader adoption, that there's going to be compromises to be made along the way. And that's not without saying that there's compromises made. Obviously, you know, we've all benefited from the current regulatory regime and certain decisions made. So I think both sides are making compromise, and I think that's how ultimately, like, we will drive things forward. However, I also think there's going to be a permissionless world out there that exists, and that's going to be kind of almost a little bit separate from what we're talking about today, where I think should maybe keep a lot of the core values, and they should still exist, but I think that they're almost kind of like I'm seeing kind of two separations, if you will. And so I think yes, but I also think we'll still see a lot of the core values live on in some of these more permissionless decentralized networks.
Yeah, I think very similar to what you were saying. One of the things that we introduced was on-chain KYC, which was kind of very controversial. It's optional, to be clear, but that allows you to start kind of figuring out where that line is between, you know, where's a fully decentralized permissionless network and where's something where, you know, the largest FIs in the world can actually play a ball. So I think both sides, as we've already said, it's going to be a little bit of a tug and war, but we are definitely making progress there, and I'm excited for the future.
I'm going to actually steal Robinson's earlier comment and use it as my own to conclude. And I will also say, as an aside, that my community has almost never been happier with me than when we did the Wormhole NTT integration, so thank you very much for that. But, you know, as you said earlier, we have to just make sure this thing is a race to the top, not a race to the bottom. And if we can learn from each other and take best practices from each other, crypto gets more comfortable with a regulatory environment, which makes us all say, I mean, Sam Bankman-Fried taught us that we need regulation, right? Taught this industry, but TradFi starts looking and they're like, why do we need calculation agents actually? Like, do we really need those? Why are we settling for T+2? Why is our collateral sitting there doing nothing? Why is our money in our pockets not earning any kind of yield? Like, all of these ideas come together and we'll figure out together how to make it a race to the top.
I will end with a very spicy take, which is permission DeFi is not a thing. That is finance on a blockchain, and if you want it to be permissioned, totally fine, but permission DeFi isn't a thing, because then it is not DeFi. I do think there are compromises to be made and changes to how these systems work. But again, it goes to what I started with, which if DeFi goes 90 and the banks come 10, we're in a permission DeFi world. I actually think, Robinson, even though I respect you very much, I think having two parallel tracks goes against the idea of having the depth of liquidity. You have these fragmented pools. And so I think we have to figure out how to build systems that are interoperable, that do have deep liquidity, that do have guardrails around it that make regulators, institutions, and others very comfortable. But I do not think we shut down and build more walled gardens than what we have today.
Permissioned DeFi is not a thing.
Permissioned DeFi is not a thing.
We can close on that. Thanks so much to our amazing panelists. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.